Welcome to Inclusion Bites, your sanctuary for bold conversations that spark change. I'm Joanne Lockwood, your guide on this journey of exploration into the heart of inclusion, belonging, and societal transformation. Ever wondered what it truly takes to create a world where everyone not only belongs, but thrives? You're not alone. Join me as we uncover the unseen, challenge the status quo, and share stories that resonate deep within. Ready to dive in? Whether you're sipping your morning coffee or winding down after a long day, let's connect, reflect, and inspire action together. Don't forget, you can be part of the conversation too. Reach out to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk to share your insights or to join me on the show. So adjust your earbuds and settle in. It's time to ignite the spark of inclusion with Inclusion Bites. And today is episode 191 with the title, Joyful Energy, Breakable Spirit. And I have the absolute honor and privilege to welcome Nassim Rochette. Nassim is an award-winning author, a keynote speaker, and joy seeker who seeks to help people reframe their stories and help discover growth in life's toughest moments. When I asked Nassim to describe her superpower, she said that it is radiating joyful energy that inspires optimism in the face of adversity. Wow. Hello, Nassim. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Joe. Thank you for having me. And I hope that's my superpower. It's what I try.
Wow. It sounds amazing. And wow. I'm judging by the accent, you're not over here in the UK where I'm based. Whereabouts in the world are you?
I wish that I were, but no, I am in New Jersey. Not that I don't love, my life here in New Jersey, but I do love the UK. Yeah, it's a hot, sunny June day here in New Jersey.
Wow. Is it disproportionately warm? Us Brits like to talk about the weather. Is it hot and sticky?
Actually it's a perfect day, but my office is my third floor attic, so it's a little bit hot up here. But I shouldn't complain about the sun.
No, there's plenty else going on in the world right now that we can complain about. The sun
Yes,
being
the
warm
sun
is
is
not one
there.
of them.
There's plenty of craziness in the world right now. I need to appreciate. Although we always need to appreciate the little things, especially.
Yeah. We're less than a week on from the audacious Ukrainian drone strike, aren't we? That's just to put a date and time on this. That was a bit audacious Zelensky
Yeah,
web. Yeah,
there's
crazy.
a lot of very concerning stuff going on in the world. Here in the U.S.,
Yeah,
in the Mideast, in Europe, it's really hard to believe, which is why I think it's even more important. I love the work that you do, Joe, in making people feel included, because there is so much in the world that's happening that could divide us further.
yeah. No, I agree, and we could get around the table and start having conversations around a table rather than throwing rocks at each other across the garden wall, if you like. We're doing often.
Yeah.
So your superpower is about radiating joyful energy, as I said just now. Where did that come from? What got you into doing what you do?
So it's interesting. So I've always, on some level, been a joy seeker. I was when I was a kid, I was kind of a happy kid, but I was also a really, really insecure kid. Just paralyzed with fear, shy. I grew up in New Jersey. When I grew up, I'm 54 now. There were really no Indians in my town. I'm of Indian origin, and I always felt different and like I didn't belong. But I also had this happy, this natural inclination to be happy. I had, happy parents, festive. Actually, my parents were crazy party animals. So, I grew up in a very social environment. And so when I was, the weekends with my family, I was, very social and happy. But, on the weekdays, I was just so uncomfortable and shy and insecure. And, I took that insecurity with me actually I lived in that insecurity for a long, long time. I often say that it wasn't until my 20s that I really accepted who I was, that I was different and or I thought differently, and that was all okay. And then it probably took me another 10 or 15 years to become somebody that I liked. And all through that, I tried to, I had this natural inclination to joy. And how do I find happiness? How do I spread happiness? How do I make people feel good and make them feel different than I felt, which was uncomfortable and alone and insecure. And I think that that has it's just served like the joy feeds joy. Oh, I think the joy keeps me energetic and young. And, I know we'll talk about, I had a very traumatic accident 7 years ago. And I think it's that desire to get back to joy. And when thought I was dying, like thinking about the joy of my life, I think those things kept me going, and so I try to keep that front and center. I mean, we all say we only live once. Actually, I saw a great little cartoon on my Instagram recently that said it was like a Snoopy and Charlie Brown. And I think Charlie Brown said, we only live once. And Snoopy said, no, we only die once. We live every day. And I want to live every day with that joy.
That's beautiful. That's a really beautiful. Yeah, I love that. I think I remember seeing that, and at the time, I remember almost like a little tear came in my eye. You could feel that inside, can't you?
I do. I think about it all the time. We live every day.
I didn't realize myself that joy was a thing until that Disney Pixar movie Inside Out, and one
I've
of the
never seen
characters. Haven't you? Oh, you've got to see it. It's one and two. There's two now. But one of the characters, basically little characters in the little girl's head, and one of the characters is anger. That little red man type character is always angry about something, like a 2-year-old, always angry about something. And then what happens is Joy, who's the female character, effectively sellotapes anger to a chair and says, "Right, you're over there. I'm now running this body."
I
And
love
I,
that.
I went through a similar epiphany where I realized that joy suddenly took over my life, and that I'd spent a lot of time with anxiety. I spent a lot of time with anger and a lot of time with these other emotions in your head. And by centering joy, that allowed me to see the world and my life more clearly. So I'm with you here about discovering joy. It's amazing
And
place.
it's interesting you say that about discovering joy, because I don't know that I used the word joy up until recently. I don't think I knew it was a thing. As I reflect back, I know I felt it, but I actually think, some of the ways that I solidified maybe that word or that idea was, again, during my accident and journey. I realized that energy feeds energy. I really believed and learned the effect of having a positive energy and how that drives momentum. And I realized that just by the words that I choose and the energy that I put forth, I drive different reactions in the people around me. And it doesn't mean life is always easy and all our conversations are like, flowers and rainbows and stuff like that. But the words we choose, the way we say it, the tone of our voice, all of that, tells a different story. And if we focus on a story with a positive outcome, with, a belief in joy or an underlying, you know, respect and desire for joy, I think we drive a much more positive energy.
So you had a pretty significant, should we call it an event,
Yeah.
understated event, which you can obviously you're going to talk a bit about some 7 or 8 years ago, as you mentioned here already. You've hinted into this, and this is, you call it your Unbreakable day. And tell me what was leading up, rather than the day itself. What's going on in your life the week before?
Yeah, I guess we really can't have a conversation. I should let all your listeners know what happened, because it is so central to so much of how I think and talk about. So, I mentioned that I was very insecure. I worked really hard to like who I was. Well, on May 21st, 2018, so 7 years ago, I woke up on another beautiful sunny day. I'm feeling really good about myself, really happy. in command. I have 3 kids, working full time. I worked at Microsoft back then. A really robust life that I worked so hard to build and so hard to appreciate. And, I juggled it all. And Joe, I like to say, I juggled it all and I made it look easy. It wasn't easy, but I took pride in the fact that I could manage all of this. And, I grew up in a household where women were strong and we didn't ask for help. Not asking for help was a source of pride. So, I started out my day like that. And by that afternoon, I was in a hospital. I had been hit by a car and run over 3 times. The car hit me and then stopped and then drove over me and then reversed over me and then drove over me a third time. And I was pinned underneath the car. And I'll just let that sit for a minute because I know it's a lot. I know there's,
That's not accidental, is it?
uh, it seems like it wouldn't be, but it was, and my husband was actually watching the whole thing. I was in a pedestrian crosswalk just a couple miles from my house in New Jersey when a car, a car turned and hit me in the crosswalk. And the car actually stopped at first. And then, we don't know why the driver did all the things. I wrote a book about the story, the unexpected benefits of being run over, because there's so much to talk about just in that event. And I don't know what the driver was thinking, but it wasn't a hit. My husband didn't hire anyone to kill me, luckily. And we believe the driver just had a lot of really bad judgment.
Compounded that by reverse, lost
Yeah.
spatial awareness, didn't know what's going on, didn't know where you were.
Yeah, I mean, I have some theories. I think maybe she was trying to flee the scene. Maybe she was trying to then get back to where she hit me in the crosswalk. Maybe eventually she was just trying to get off me, but everybody was screaming, just stop. And I was conscious through the whole event. Uh, God, I always get a little, even 7 years later talking about it. I was I went from everything to, initially having that, oh my gosh, she's hitting me on this great day. I'm feeling so good. I've had such a wonderful day and not worried, thinking I might be a little black and blue, but no biggie, cocktail party story, whatever. I got hit by a car today. Haha. To, then when she ran over me, I was wriggling. I was trying to get out from underneath it. I didn't want to die. And then when she reversed over me, I remember thinking there's something wrong. Like I could hear in my husband's voice that he was watching me die. I could hear it in the screams of all the people watching it that they were watching someone die. And I had in those moments, which actually feel, I call it a magical accident because there's so much that I feel lucky for and that I think I have learned. And one of those things was when I was underneath the car thinking, I don't even say 99, I was 100% sure I was going to die. I started reflecting back on my life and, having those end of life thoughts. And I remember thinking, why didn't I write my kids letters? I traveled every time I get on a plane. I think, oh, I should write them letters just in case. I never did it. And then, my thoughts, and it was like 20 minutes of conversation, even, in these matter of seconds, because everything was in slow motion for me. And then I came to the conclusion that although I didn't write my kids any letters, we've had so much joy. We've had great vacations. We would dance around the kitchen. We were like, we're a happy gang. And I thought, even though I'm they're going to lose their mom, they know who I am because we've had that joy. I've been present. I've I've filled, their life with love. And I felt so good about that. But you know what, Joe, I also realized that I did that for my kids, but I didn't do that for the other people in my life. No one else really knew how important they were. I wasn't super effusive and appreciative. I was always like nice and caring, but I don't think most people in my life that had an impact, whether big or small, knew the positive effects or that I appreciated, what they did. And I felt like there was a lot left unsaid in the community and in my friend circle. And that I felt felt some regret. But both of those things really helped me afterwards in how I wanted to live. There were no thoughts about I should have saved more money. I wish I got more promotions. It was all about people and the people I connected with.
As you're talking, as you first started talking about that, and I have a habit of not reading the briefing notes that you sent through. So I flicked through it and I saw something about being unbreakable. I saw something about being a life-changing, but I didn't really get into the weeds of that. And I've effectively discovered everything you just said at the same time. If you're listening to this, I heard that for the same time. And as you were describing it, the visual image I had in my head was the end of the previous series of Handmaid's Tale. And if you've seen this, but the lead character, June, she gets run over by a pickup and that person is trying to hurt them and they're reversing back. So you're
You
describing
spoiled
it.
that for me because no, I didn't see it. Yeah, but anyway.
Sorry, spoiler alert, spoiler. But the good news is she survives and she's a fighter like you. But so I've got this real image in my head of as you were describing it. I had a vision. I wasn't trying to create a picture. I had one. And that's why it was impactful for me. And when you tell that story to people go, obviously, they're shocked, they're stunned. Do they know what to say? Do they know what to ask? Because I've got loads of questions in my head. I'm thinking, I'm going to ask these questions in a bit because that's one of the privileges I have of being the host on this show. But do people struggle to say?
They do. I try to give people a minute to digest it, when there's time, because I often forget quite how ridiculous it is. And I think people, their first reaction is, I'm sorry, like that's so horrible. But what's interesting is for me is it's like I learned so much. There's so much joy that has come out of it that I don't look at it as, actually recently I had to do this timeline of positive and negative things. And the accident, oddly, was not a negative thing. It was on the positive trajectory because of all I learned. But, as you said, people definitely don't know what to say when it happened. In fact, I don't know if these things are funny. They're funny to me. But when I did write the book, and the book came out, and I explained quite the seriousness of the journey and all the things that I learned, so many people in the periphery of my life said, when I heard the story, I thought someone was kidding. I didn't actually believe that you were run over 3 times. Most people it's just so nonsensical that I would be run over 3 times that a lot of people just didn't believe that it was true. My
So
dog.
I'm going to ask the question that's going through my head, and if you're listening to this,
Ask
I'm trying to
anything.
ask the question on your behalf as well. These are the questions that people say, "Oh, you should never ask that. You should never." It obviously hurt. Which part of you was run over, or was it all over?
So when the car first hit, it was, kind of chest level. It was a big SUV, a big white SUV. And then, the tires went over me 5 times. So they went over my knees, they went over my chest, and this is the craziest. They went over my head and neck. So, it went over my head and over my neck. The cars went over my head. And I remember, and Joe, the look like that was how I was thinking about it after, because I was conscious and I knew what happened. My husband saw what happened. Other people saw what happened. But I thought, how can a car run over my head and neck and run over me and I'm still alive? And I remember after the accident, I kept wondering, like, it couldn't have really happened. Like, there's no way that really happened. And a week later, and I call this, again, if anyone sees my website or book or anything, you might see this picture. There is a picture of my neck with tire marks that showed up a few days later. And I call that my favorite accident picture because it was the proof that it really did happen. I mean, I had the pain, but I didn't really believe it. And here's another crazy thing. I didn't break any bones.
That was my next question. So you didn't break any bones? No.
I mean, I had a lot of very serious injuries. I was
Crushed.
so, I had a lot of internal injuries. I couldn't walk. I had to have surgery on my eye. I had nerve damage. I was pretty immobile for a while. And I have a traumatic brain injury. I still, I don't think how I used to think, but I didn't break any bones. So I was actually never admitted to the hospital. So 24 hours later, I was back at home trying to navigate what to
Being
do.
a mum.
Yeah. Yeah, that was probably one of the hardest. There were many things that were hard. That was very hard. The driver's lack of remorse was really hard. There were a couple things that probably didn't need to be as hard that were, real lessons.
So you said to the driver's lack of remorse. They understand the gravity of what happened. It was kind of like, were they trying to imprint it was your fault for getting in the way or something?
Yeah, kind of. So at the scene, the driver, so my husband was at the scene. So the driver got out of the car and she was like a toddler throwing a tantrum. And my husband actually said, like, don't you even care what happened to her? Like she just seemed to be worried about herself. And, I remember the witnesses, the other people there had to move her away because they couldn't even talk to me to try to keep me conscious and alert because of all her screaming. But look, that's shock. I actually held.
But yeah, trauma. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought, she didn't mean to run over me 3 times. Like, obviously a lot of bad decisions, bad judgment, but I actually held no ill will to them. And when we got a notice in the mail, like a victim's notice that she was going to be in court, 4 or 5 weeks later. So my husband and my daughter and I went to the courthouse and she was just a few feet away from me. I was bandaged, cane, scars on my face, glasses, like, I was still in bad shape. And, she'd seen my husband and she was a few feet away, didn't acknowledge us, you know, nothing. There was like no human kindness or interaction or, I hope you're okay or anything. And I remember it was like someone pushed me off a cliff at that moment. That's the moment that I fully lost control of, my emotions. There was no joy because till that till that day I felt no ill will. She didn't mean to do it. But when I saw no kindness, no connection, nothing from her, it just broke me.
I'm just thinking if she'd have come up to you in tears, full of remorse and devastated, and say, "Can we hug?" You'd have gone, "Of course we can hug." Couldn't
Yes.
you? You could have done that. But as you say, because someone doesn't treat you in that way, that there's no acknowledgement of your pain, your trauma, and your family and everyone who knows you, then uh, I'm more upset around that reaction than I am around,
Yeah.
as you are. As you say, that's where you lost it.
Yeah. It really, really, when I say like push me off a cliff, I actually that day I went home and, when my kids think about this day, they still get teary eyed because the mom that was so joyful was, the happy life we had. On that day, it hit rock bottom. I went home. I remember my youngest child asked if he could go to the pool. It was a nice day. And I started screaming at him. I was screaming at our babysitter, at all my kids. Like they didn't know who they were getting when they would ask me something because
Yeah.
I was so broken, for a minute. And then that's actually the day that I realized that I no longer could control my mental state without more help. And I started on antidepressants and anti-anxiety that day.
I love analogies and metaphors and similes and things like this. And this, what's jumping into my head here is Star Wars, Jedi's and Siths. And the hard thing here is trying to stay in the Jedi camp and not get engrossed with anger and revenge and all that. And that must have been really difficult because it sounds like you were leaning into the Sith there and the dark side, weren't you?
Well, yeah, it's strange. I'm not sure that it was ever anger. I think it was anger for my husband and for my daughter and, all the people that loved me. But for me, it was just such a sadness, such a disappointment, and I don't know that I've ever really had anger for her, but I just felt sad. I still feel sad. No, but I focus on the life that I get to lead and the way that I treat people and the decisions I make. And, I've also come to reconcile it. One of the other things that I learned during this journey is sometimes the people you think are going to show up for you in your times of need don't or don't show up the way you expect them to show up for you. What I have realized is that we have no idea the traumas and the triggers of the people around us. For instance, today, nobody looks at me and says, wow, she was run over 3 times. Like, I'm sure she can't cross the street. Like, no one has any idea what goes on. And I think that people, we don't necessarily know what those triggers are for the people around us. And I think that my accident and seeing me broken and bruised and disfigured and just so weak after being such a strong person, it was hard for people. And I think that's sometimes they can't show up. It's their defense mechanism. It's their body protecting them, their mind protecting them. And so I now attribute that to the driver. Maybe the way that she deals with that accident is by pretending it didn't happen. And is that how I would deal with it? No. But maybe that's her way of protecting herself. I don't live that way, but you know what?
Yeah, I do a lot of training on challenging conversations and workplace conflicts, all this kind of thing. And one of the golden rules is you have to meet people where they're at. You have to understand where someone is. Because if you start judging them by where you're at, you've no idea what's going on in their life. And you have somehow to create that relatable experience, you have to find out where they are. I guess you don't really know where she was or what she's at. So by judging her, she may well have been in an abusive relationship. She may have been trying to escape something. She may have had, I don't know, something going on in her mind or her own mental health concerns. And by judging her by your standards, it's not going to get anywhere. So, yeah, that must be the frustration, I suppose, is it sounds like today, even now, you're not sure where she was at. It just...
Yeah, I mean, I saw her a few years later. The insurance legal team was deposing us. And when I saw her that day too, I was going around introducing myself to everybody, and when I didn't know she was going to be there. And when she walked in, I didn't want to be rude. I went and I shook her hand and I introduced myself. And I remember even at that moment feeling like, squeeze my hand, do something. And I didn't get that. And then when she talked about the accident, she almost talked about it like I wasn't really in a crosswalk. There weren't really people there. She like that witnessed it, almost said it didn't happen. And that is her defense. That's where she is. That's where she's staying. And I'm not engaging.
No. When you come across people with personality disorders, narcissistic tendencies, whatever it may be, you have to disengage and step away because nothing you can say will change that.
Yeah. And as you said, it's meeting them where they are. If that's where they are, and that's whether it's by situation or, by intention.
I assume that the law and law enforcement gave her
I
something
know.
to think about. No?
Yeah, she lost her license for 10 days and got a ticket for failure to yield to a pedestrian. So
Is that it?
that's
Not
it.
attempted murder or attempted manslaughter or grievous bodily
No,
harm?
there was nothing. There's not just a traffic violation.
Wow.
But
That must
again,
have been salt on the wound.
it was. Yeah. Yeah, especially when I was, so badly injured, and how my life changed. I couldn't drive for several weeks, couple months, and she lost her license for 10 days. But again, there was so much that I've learned from it, that I can only focus, or I am choosing to focus on what I can control.
I just think you could have done an O.J. Simpson and gone for civil claim, couldn't you? And sort of, if the law doesn't protect you, then we do
I
the civil.
know. The thing though is then it keeps that wound open for me.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And look, I'm very fortunate. I have a good job, good family, happy life. Obviously there are always challenges, and this was very challenging and has changed me. But I want to focus on all that good as much.
And you got a story, you got a book.
I do have a book, and actually, so the book, The Unexpected Benefits of Being Run Over. And that is, many people think it's figurative, but it's literal. Yeah, the book is actually something I had no plan to write. So when the accident happened and I went to the hospital and we discovered I didn't break any bones, many of the nurses and doctors, it was a miracle, and kept saying, you need to pay it forward. You need to do something, this is a miracle. And I remember thinking, I can't even open my eyes. I can't move. Like, I don't want the burden of having to pay it forward. But it did plant a seed. And, I kept thinking about how can I make something good out of this? And one of the things that happened, in that first year, I talk about joy and a happy life. My life wasn't so happy after this accident. I would wake up crying every day. I couldn't move. My brain didn't work. I couldn't hold a coffee cup. I couldn't zip my sweatshirt. I couldn't fill out a camp form. Like all those things that you don't think about, I couldn't do. It was very, very, very hard. But we made the decision, you talked about Unbreakable Day. We made the decision that we were going to get back to a happy story. And the day of the accident wasn't going to be the day that almost killed me. It was going to be the day that I survived. And we reframed it, and that reframing allowed us to really change the energy around the story. I didn't die that day when I should have. I survived. And then we started to look at all of the things that you learn in those moments, because the accident didn't just happen to me. It happened to everyone that loved me. It happened to my kids, to my husband, to my friends. And there's so many things that I learned, one of which is people needed to help me to heal themselves. And I needed to learn how to let them. I mentioned I tried to make it look easy, and, not accepting help was strength to me. But I learned that accepting help, letting people help, is actually another dimension of strength. And sometimes that's about them because they need to participate in the journey, whether or not I might need the support, and that when you let yourself have the support, sometimes it's really beautiful how people want to give and help and do good. So those were some of the things I was learning. And I would send out, an email every year on Unbreakable Day and say, here are some of the things that I learned. That was my way of paying it forward. And when we were in lockdown with COVID, I realized some of those things that I learned would be of value on a broader basis. We were living in like this giant Unbreakable Day. And honestly, if I could have just said, hey, here are these 10 lessons, world, take that, I'm done. I would have just shared that and probably not have a book or anything. I realized people need to know the context and my story for those lessons to really have meaning. There's a section in my book called The Sermon, and those are my 10 lessons. But the first couple parts of the book are about who I am, the journey, how my first transformation of being a person I like to that person falling apart, and then having to rebuild and hopefully being a better, stronger person, or a different, more connected person. That's kind of how the book happened. The book, is often regarded as a self-help or an inspiration or motivational, but it is also a memoir. And it's, I'm sharing probably a lot more than I would ever have been comfortable sharing with people about, the struggles, about, my insecurities as a child, candidly, I'll share about it, a suicide attempt that I had never, ever talked about, but then realized even, young people especially need to know the story can change. Your story can change. And there's so much power in reframing. And so that's why the book happened, because I felt people need an inventory and they need to know that it's possible to come out of something really, really horrible and be okay. And you might not be the person you were before, but that doesn't have to be bad. You have to be kind enough to not judge yourself for that. And it was lessons like that I felt were so important to share, because, another thing I learned through this journey was that we all go through something. I was run over by a car 3 times. That maybe people haven't experienced that, but people have experienced deaths and job losses and other accidents and things that are traumatic. We've all gone through something. And when we share what we've been through, we also give license to other people to share.
Are you brave? I'm sure people say to you, you're brave all the time. So are you?
I'm joyful.
Joyful. Good answer.
Maybe I'm brave only to be, only to reach that joy.
I find that, and many people I know who have been through something really significant in their life, people come up to them and go, they want to tell you how brave you are, tell you how I couldn't have done that, and they want to sort of put this on you, and then you want them to go, it's okay, you could have done it too. I'm not anyone special, and you feel like you have to go through this sort of this way of letting someone down and go, I'm just a human being. I'm just playing the cards that I given at the time. Yeah, in 10 seconds of my life, suddenly I went from being this person to this person. I wasn't brave. I just carried on.
Actually, and I'm so glad you brought that point up, because something I should share is a way that I learned to talk about how this is just my journey. So when right after the accident, I had, as much as I didn't like accepting help from people, that I was close to me, my doctors convinced me to see a trauma therapist. And the trauma therapist taught me about the Japanese art of kintsugi, where you take a broken piece of pottery and you put it back together with a gold.
Ted Lasso, broken, isn't it? On Ted Lasso, yeah.
And, the philosophy is that gold inlay, those cracks make the vase more beautiful. And I really, really latched on to that idea. And actually, I had scars all over my face. I would put gold glitter on my scars, rather than try to hide them, because I decided this was my journey. And just that idea allowed me to talk about my struggles, not as a victim, but this is my journey. And just realizing that reframing let me be more open and more vulnerable and share in ways that I couldn't have before.
Do you ever get that feeling where you press pause on your life for a moment and you were kind of above looking down at you going, I now see everything more clearly. I see where I am in the world, what's going on around. Do you ever get that kind of allow yourself to see a bigger perspective of who you were? Did that happen?
I think in moments it did. And there was in that early year, even in those first moments, I mean, when I thought I was dying, I felt I think I had that clarity. And I think, in those early months, in that first maybe year or 2 years, I had a more acute appreciation, but it goes away if you don't purposely remind yourself to embrace it. Like I have a bunch of tattoos. I don't know if you can see them. Your listeners certainly can't see them, but I have a bunch of tattoos on my arms now to remind me of things that I learned from the accident. Because, I'm not all of a sudden enlightened. I don't have all this wisdom. I mean, part of actually the gift of sharing what I learned is that I get to remind myself, because we have to actively, work at many of these things. I mean, is it easier for me to share now and talk about my journey and my struggles and, maybe what I would have called weaknesses? Absolutely. But I still have to be intentional about some of the other things I learned so that I can look at life, more, at a kind of a more inclusive, broader level, and appreciate and not get lost in the craziness of a moment or the weight of, a momentary struggle.
A lot of people get stuck down to fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of what if. And I presume what you've been through, that barrier is taken away. You were in this situation, and the what if is, I can't stay where I am. I've got to move on. I've got to grow. I've got to do something. How do you help people find their transformation where they can go from fear to can?
Yeah, and I think just in even what you said, it's, changing from fear to can. Just think about it. It's the words that you use. It's the story you tell yourself. It's the way, like, even let's just take the fact that we call the day of the accident Unbreakable Day. Just by simply reframing and changing the words we use around what we call that moment, we've done something dramatically different, for the people that we tell the story to, for how we think about that moment and that day. And it's actually just little things in the reframing. And, I often talk about being kind to yourself. And it's actually, I talk about it because many of the people that first read the book said that's what they took, that they needed to learn to be kinder to themselves, because we are so judgy with ourselves, you know. But if we remember, Like, it's okay if we're not, life is going to change. It is absolutely going to change. But if it's different from the way it was a year ago, it doesn't have to be bad. Maybe there's some differences that you like more than others or dislike more than others. But the way we think about it, the words we use around it, the words and how we talk about it to the people around us, all of those things have a huge, huge impact on how we will feel those things, on how our body will react to those things. I actually have had people say to me that on the days of their accidents, they used to just crawl up in a ball in bed or hide in a closet and just be sad and miserable. But when they started reframing to those days as their unbreakable days, they started going out and celebrating. They started having, like ice cream and parties and just making those days special. And all it was is a reframing.
One of the things I always reflect on is that when you're trying to sort your life out, you've collected so much baggage over the years, the responsibilities, the things, stuff you have in your life. But when it comes to making decisions, you think, well, what can I get rid of? What can I lose? And it's very difficult to sort of peel bits away because they're kind of part of what you've got. But when you start from nothing, you can then choose what to bring on. What luggage do I want to now bring on my journey? And just shed everything and say, right, I guess you had a day zero sort of effect where you had nothing because you were this millimeters away from dying, I guess, or moments away from dying. So you've been able to reestablish your journey of life with stuff that's important.
Yeah. I mean, the traumas, I think for all of us, are a demarcation point. There's definitely like life before, and life after. But I will say, and something that I talk about when I do coaching or keynotes is, there's so much power in those tough moments. There's so much we learn and grow from that most of us don't spend any time thinking about because tough moments always seem like downers. So let's not talk about those downers. Let's put them in the closet and, never talk about them again. But when we actually take some time to both appreciate, hey, I've navigated something that was really challenging. I did that. My family did that. My friends helped me through that. Yeah, that was really great that we were able to navigate that tough moment. And believe me, it doesn't mean the tough moment wasn't tough. I lost my parents a couple of years ago. There's nothing joyful about me losing my parents, but are there things and ways that I've grown that I can appreciate? Absolutely. Being run over is obviously a tough moment. Everybody has tough moments, but if you stop and you think, well, what did I learn from that? You're again changing it from baggage to almost badges, that you can feel proud of.
A bit like being a Girl Guide again and getting your cooking badge or your sewing badge or something.
I never got any of those.
I was camp cook once. I got the camp cook badge. Yeah. Chicken in a pot, I think it was. I think that's something very simple. I was only 10, I think. Yeah, I was quite happy with it. So
yeah.
when you're navigating the world now, as well as coaching others, how do you find yourself approaching these big crossroads, these big decision points in your life now? How do you approach things differently?
For me, joy is one of my guiding principles. And I think about, does it bring me joy or does it bring me stress? And if it's bringing me stress, and it's a situation that I want to stay in, then we need to break down, why is it bringing me stress? And, if it's a situation that's bringing you stress, also you have to ask yourself, is it a situation you can get out of? And what's the cost of getting out of it? So that's how I often, work with people. I mean, what are their guiding principles? Mine is joy. And so what are the things that you want to feel on a daily basis? And once we can figure out some idea of that, it's how do we reach that state more often?
Are you less tolerant of people or more tolerant of people now?
Let's see. I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, honestly, my kids like to call me a little judgy, but
I'm just thinking in terms of what you're saying about joy, and it's not bringing you joy; it's bringing you stress. Do you apply that principle to relationships where you think, hang on a minute, you're not bringing me joy in this relationship. We are not compatible anymore. I'm out.
Yeah, I don't know that I definitely direct my life towards the joy. I don't know that I'd say I'm like I try to, as we talked about earlier, accept people where they are. And if they're in a place that isn't right for me, then I'll just try to spend less time with them. But when the time that I spend with them, I try to be as giving and kind and tolerant, as I can be, because, as we've talked about, people feeling connected is so important. And sometimes just accepting that if we build a better connection, the engagement or relationship might evolve and drastically improve. Sometimes I get, I'll hear people, sometimes people are grumpy, and for instance, I try not to judge someone in that moment, but think about why are they in that state? Just like you had talked about earlier, meeting them where they are. So I try to be tolerant in that way and giving them more grace and kindness. So maybe I'm less, when someone said to me, a year after the accident was they told me that I was, before the accident, I was an unsympathetic character that, I kind of had it put together and, I looked like it was easy and, not that any of it was, but I was proud of that.
You had a persona,
Yeah.
got
And
my
so,
shit together persona sort of thing.
yes, exactly. And so now I try to be more vulnerable so that, you know, other people that I can be more accepting and open and inclusive to people connecting. Because often the people that I might have been judgy about are just feeling alone.
That must be part of your superpower, which is radiating joyful energy. So if you go in with a frown, that's not radiating joyful energy, is it? So my approach is I tend to turn the volume down on people that don't bring me joy. There's a phrase, hang out with radiators, not drains. Drains will steal your energy. Yeah,
I'm stealing
it's the
that phrase.
Dementors from Harry Potter. They suck the energy out of it. So on social media, what I do is I unfollow somebody. If I don't want to hear from them, I don't go into their post and tell them what I think. I just turn the volume down to unfollow. That way, if they want to keep following me, they want to still see me, they want to still get value from that relationship, that's fine. And if they bump into me, I'm still there. And so I think blocking and unfriending and things like that they're very proactive states to get people out of your life. But turn the volume down. Your noise doesn't bring me joy. That's fine. Doesn't matter. It brings other people joy. That's up to them. So yeah, turn the volume down.
Do that too. And actually, speaking of social media, one of the things that I um, think is important to talk about now and is that, like, I talk to my kids are teenagers and in college or kind of adult kids, but when people are always posting just like, oh, my life is so great and perfect, I think people don't realize they're making themselves unsympathetic characters and they're losing connection with people. And I think so one of the things that I do often in my talks is also try to remind people that, if you're not showing the whole picture or sharing the whole picture, you're losing out on the joy of connections.
I think when you talk about influencers and people that like that, then it has to be authentic vulnerability, not plastic or fake Barbie vulnerability. It's like, I'm having a really bad day. Everything's really awful today. And if you're not careful, you're use that deliberate to bring people in. Whereas, if you really are having a bad day, be honest.
Just, yeah,
Yeah.
So you
I'm
can even
struggling
say
today.
something like, yeah, it's a tough day. Send me your good energy, you know?
Yeah. Or why? Yeah. Why? Just sometimes you leave it hanging, don't you? So I'm having a really bad one today. What is it? What is it? What is it? Everyone's keen to find out. You just go, oh no, I can't say. Well, if you can't say, why tell me in the first place? If your dog died, tell us your dog died, and then we'll go, oh my, lovely picture. Yeah, let's do that. And or if you ever have kids that have messed up, just say, or if you've been run over 3 times, just get it out there.
Put it out there. Or, just share it with people.
So the other question I've been keen to ask you is, obviously this had a huge, big traumatic at the time. You were injured, you had organs that were crushed and nerve injuries and things like that. How long did it take you to get to a point where you felt normal again, whatever that may mean? I don't know what normal means, but kind of back to I'm good enough now.
When when the accident first happened and I found out I didn't break any bones, and I'm sorry about all that the beeping. I actually said to my husband, I said, call my boss and tell him I'll be back to work on Thursday. This was a Monday. Because I was like, if I didn't break any bones, I'm sure I can go back
Yeah,
to
I'm
work.
just faking it otherwise, aren't I? I'm just faking it.
That's exactly right. Like, yeah, I didn't give myself any grace. Obviously, I did not go back to work on Thursday. And it took me a long, the recovery was very long, but my engagement back into my old life was quick, maybe too quick. So I went back to work after 8 weeks, against doctor's orders. And I just felt like I needed to, like you said, feel like I wanted to feel normal. And for me, that was getting back to work and, earning and supporting my family. And my babysitter said the day that I went back to work, my kids were like different kids because they thought life would never be the same again. However, I went back to work and it was much too soon. And I didn't have the physical or mental energy. Like I would still needed to sleep 16 hours days. And so unfortunately, I gave my energy to work and then I had nothing for my family. And that probably took, and so, I was still a very unpredictable person. It took me a long time to regulate my emotions. I would say it was like a year and a half before I felt normal, but it wasn't the same. It was a new normal. And, even now, I mean, I have a, bad knee. I have, you know, back pain, neck pain. They're issues. I can't bear music in multiple rooms, and lots of sensitivities because of my brain injury, but that is my new normal. And so I don't think about those things. It's just my new normal.
And every day is more normal. It's who you are, and you built up a legacy.
Yeah.
You've now got history of who you are now.
Yes. And I'm not judging myself that I'm not that person that I was before. I don't juggle. Like I used to be a master of chaos and, juggling 100 things, with loud, like, even like clubbing at 3 o'clock in the morning, loud concerts. Like I loved all that extra stimulation. I can't tolerate or bear that anymore. But, that's okay because I'm appreciating different things, and I'll brag for a minute in that much to my surprise, when I went back to work, I thought I was never going to be as good as I used to be because I can't solve problems in the same way. But it turns out the new ways in which I solve problems and delve into things has been more successful for me. With a traumatic brain injury, I've actually, been better able to serve my teams and my clients.
But apart from joy, what is the one thing that you're most proud of about you now that wouldn't have occurred had it not been for Unbreakable Day?
I think it's really my ability to share what I thought was weakness, to share struggle and journey and understand what it feels like and how to relate to people when they're going through something tough. For instance, like, when someone goes through a death, or a trauma, I think many people are very uncomfortable with, what do you say? How do you respond? How do you act? Because of these experiences and because I think I've taken the time to explore what I've learned and how I've changed, I don't feel as awkward, in those moments. I know that, when somebody dies, like my saying, I'm sorry about your loss isn't bringing it up because they're thinking about it all the time. I know and they appreciate that warmth and that connection. I know that now that when somebody's in trauma, asking them how they are is a really tough question because they don't know how they are and they don't want to lie to you and they don't want to pretend everything's fine. And so you're making them do all this work internally. Whereas if I just say, I'm thinking about you, I'm here for you, a statement, not a question, I make it easier on them. So, I think the other thing, that's just how to relate to people in those tough moments. I'm lucky that I can do
This has
that.
been a fantastic conversation, and I'm in a way, I'm really pleased I didn't do too much research, and I I heard the story at the same time as you listening. You got that kind of wall when I sat here and you said my face was a picture. I was literally stunned into sort of silence as I was picturing June Osborne in Handmaid's Tale being run over by the red RV, which I've
And
now
again,
ruined that story.
spoiler, now I've got to go watch
I
it.
spoiled it. Gotta go watch it. How can people get hold of you? Tell us about your book. Tell us about your website and everything.
My book is called The Unexpected Benefits of Being Run Over. You can pretty much get it, wherever books are sold or order it. Certainly it's on Amazon. And on Amazon, you can also get my Audible, which is me telling the story. So if you want to hear it. And, I've got a website, NassimRochette.com, where you can reach out if you're interested in coaching or, speaking, or, or LinkedIn. I'd love to say that I post a lot on social and share wisdom, but I'm not good at that yet. So you can buy my book on Amazon or reach out on NassimRochette.com.
Thank you so much. It's been amazing.
Oh, thank you, Joe. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Bye. As we bring this conversation to a close, I want to express my deepest gratitude to you, our listener, for lending your ear and heart to the cause of inclusion. If today's discussion struck a chord, consider subscribing to Inclusion Bites and become part of our ever-growing community, driving real change. Share this journey with friends, family, and colleagues. Let's amplify the voices that matter. Got thoughts, stories, or a vision to share? I'm all ears. Reach out to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk and let's make your voice heard. Until next time, this is Joanne Lockwood, signing off with a promise to return with more enriching narratives that challenge, inspire, and unite us all. Here's to fostering a more inclusive world, one episode at a time. Catch you on the next bite.